Welcome to part 2 of the question and answer session. I'll try to get through the rest of the questions in this video. If I don't make it to your question, what I'll do is I'll answer the question directly in the comments at some point. Yes, you're 100% correct. This was the house for a farm. When they auctioned off the property, they subdivided the land into farmland and also residential area. As I mentioned in a previous video, land that's designated as farmland can only be bought by registered farmers, and there are certain requirements you need to meet to become a farmer, which is not so easy. So in order to make it easy to sell, they decided to auction off the residential portion separately, and other people did buy the adjoining farmland. Only one of them is being used, and only a small section of that. The other sections of farmland were left abandoned. We actually did apply to have the adjoining farmland converted into residential land so that we could buy it, but we were denied by the local authorities. I think when the house is all done and we've settled in here, I'm going to explore in more depth exactly how we might be able to buy or use that land. Will we be putting in a pool? I doubt it. Actually, it isn't very common in here. I don't think I've ever seen an in-ground permanent swimming pool in a residential property in Japan. I'm sure there are some somewhere, especially at the higher end residences. I am not a massive water person. I don't like swimming that much. I've never been a really good swimmer, and I don't think even if I were in Australia, I would get one. I don't know, I associate it with a lot of maintenance, and like I said, I'm not passionate about swimming, although it would be nice to have the occasional dip to cool off in the summer because it does get really hot and humid and pretty uncomfortable. Another question here from Black Mochi. A fence? I don't think so. The thing is, I don't know if a fence serves much of a practical purpose. In terms of security, I don't think there's any real way of securing this property any more than it is now, i.e. it's not really secure. And it's not something you worry too much about in Japan, although there is crime here and there are robberies. In terms of privacy, you'd need to build a pretty high fence to block the view from the road up the back there. So again, I don't think that serves much of a purpose. But otherwise, I like the open feel of having no fence. It makes the property seem a lot bigger than it is. But overall, most houses in Japan do have fences, whether it be a permanent construction or something like a hedge. Yeah, the idea is to have a deck, like a temple deck, going all the way around the house. That probably will happen next year, and it's something that my wife really wants me to start work on, and I'm keen to do it. So I want to try and do a lot of it by myself, even though it could be quite complex, but I can always ask the carpenters for tips and help if necessary. So in regards to the Japanese garden, assuming that there is no koi fish pond, which at the beginning there won't be, I've been reading a book that I got from the US. It's by a Japanese author. I'll put the link down below. And that's got some good ideas about laying out a garden and building a fence. So I want to have a Japanese fence around the garden to make it kind of like a private garden. Anyway, we've got the bath area there. It's only just an idea now, and that also is something that's going to happen most likely next year. In regards to recommendations on plants and trees, I'm pretty early on in the research. I do have a few names and I've got some ideas, but there's so much going on right now that I probably can't say anything now. I will do a video, a proper video on that garden. So at that point I will go through the names and so on of plants and trees that can be used in a traditional garden. We're already growing vegetables, My idea is to use some of our spare land, and if we are able to use the adjoining farmland, grow vegetables there. So bathrooms in Japan are wet bathrooms in that you have the shower and the bath contained in one area. So before you get in the bath, you shower yourself, clean yourself, and then you sit in the bath when you're already clean, so you don't get any dirt into the bath in theory. Attached to the bathroom is a changing room, and this is where you would have the vanity unit, and also it usually doubles as a laundry too. So the idea is that you get changed and you stick your clothes straight into the washing machine. So this is where we're up to in the bathroom as of today. So what we're doing is what's called a half unit. The bottom section is a standard Japanese bath, self-contained plastic section. So we've decided to go for that because it's easier to maintain and clean than say tiles, remembering that the room is generally wet the whole time. And then the walls are hinoki, which is a Japanese cypress, and it's highly resistant to moisture and rot and gives off a very nice fragrance. Yes, we will be having a full-sized oven. Full-sized ovens are not very common in Japan, so it's a little bit expensive, but it's something that I really wanted to have because, as I mentioned in my last video, I like to cook, but also I really like to bake. And so it was important for us to have one. I also like to have the occasional Sunday roast. The oyaishi stone that we're using for the wood burning stove area is actually quite a soft stone and wouldn't be suitable for a kitchen countertop. So we're using for our kitchen counter a material from the USA, I believe, called Korean. I think that's how you pronounce it. So when it comes to building codes, I was pretty surprised. I was expecting there to be quite a bit of red tape and bureaucracy in Japan. But actually, when it comes to renovations, you don't need any specific approvals from the local authorities. You don't receive any visits or inspections. It's really just up to the architect and builder to build according to codes and standards. When it comes to new builds, that's a different story, and there are a lot more requirements. But yeah, for renovations, it's pretty relaxed. In regards to the Homeowners Association, as far as I'm aware, there isn't really one. You don't need any sort of approval from a group like that, but often it's just polite to ask your neighbours or warn your neighbours what you're planning to do. For example, we're growing those large hedges along the fence with our neighbour, so we told them that's what we're planning to do and would it be okay to do that, and they said yeah, no problems. As for maintenance for the outer beams, the ones that I sanded and painted, the stain I use is supposed to last for about 5 years, so we'll see. Obviously it's not going to be easy work to maintain it, but hopefully now it's relatively clean, that it won't require too much. I do have some scaffolding that the original carpenter gave to me, so I can use that, otherwise of course I'd just get up on ladders. Yes, termites are a big worry here. We've only found termites in small parts of the property. The worst section was a little bit of the bathhouse. There was one post that had been eaten by termites, but they seem to have disappeared and gone away. But we have taken some measures against termites, so all of the foundations under the house and the bathhouse, the carpenter mainly has painted with anti-termite paint, and I did the bathhouse. In regards to rent, I was just having a look at some of the standard websites for rental properties in Japan, and there aren't many properties like this on the market for rent, even though I'm sure there are plenty that are vacant. So looking at the Ibaraki Prefecture's Akiya Bank, the rent for a Kominka style house seems to be from around 50,000 yen to 120,000 yen, which is like $500 to 1,200 US dollars.私の日本語はそんなに上手じゃないと思いますが、理解してくれているようですね。実はこのプロジェクト、この古民家を再生するプロジェクトのおかげでちょっと上達してきたと思いますね。特に建築の単語とかそれを結構習いました。So I'd studied a bit of Japanese back in high school in Australia, but not really to a level that I could confidently converse in Japan with a native speaker. I then lived in Japan. This is the second time I've lived in Japan, from 2003 to 2005 on a working holiday visa. And at that time I was studying pretty hard. I mean, I enjoy learning languages. So I was mainly doing self-study. I did take some classes, but mainly studying in cafes and so on, and talking with friends and things like that. So I got to an okay level at that point. So when I came back to Japan a couple of years ago, I mean, I was rusty, but I got back into it relatively quickly. The problem I found is that I couldn't remember any of the kanji. I had a real tough time reading. And because of that, it was really hard to acquire vocabulary. So I found that what I would recommend to anyone studying Japanese, even if you're an absolute beginner, is just to target the kanji first. Really study that hard, because once you know that, you can still read and you can pick up vocabulary, because compared to a language like, say, Spanish, where you can read it and walk down the street and, you know, pick up words here and there, read the newspaper and learn new words and so on. You can't do that with Japanese. Even the most basic words, if they're written in kanji, if you can't read the kanji, you cannot understand how to say the word. I found a website that was really helpful for me. It's called Kanji Sharks, I think, or something like that. I'll put the link in the description below. But I would recommend just going through that, and that was the easiest way I found to remember kanji, because I'm terrible at memorizing. Before that, I would just, one day I would write the kanji out a few times, lots of times, and next day I would revise the kanji and I'd look at it and I wouldn't remember a thing. It looked like a completely new kanji to me. So that Kanji Sharks method was really good for me. Renovation project has actually been really good for my Japanese. So I'm kind of coordinating the project. So I deal with the architect and the carpenters on a daily basis. Also other tradesmen, I call up for quotes on certain things as well. So I've sort of jumped in the deep end, and yeah, it's been great. My accent is still pretty strongly Australian, but that's all right. I'm not so worried about accent and things like that, as long as people can understand me, okay, which they seem to do. So I mentioned language a moment ago, and I'd say that that probably is going to be the hardest thing about living here. Apart from that, it's pretty easy to live in Japan. So why do we live in Japan? Well, the main reason is because my wife's Japanese. Also, of course, our kids are half Japanese, and we thought it was important that they experience living here, also learn to speak Japanese well. So there's those reasons. Plus, another reason was we were living in London, and London's pretty far from Melbourne, so 24-hour flight. We wanted to be a little bit closer to friends and family and my parents in Melbourne. So from Tokyo to Melbourne, it's a 10-hour flight. But the key thing is that there's only 1 hour time difference, or 2 hours depending on the time of the year. So you can really make a short trip if you really need to, and you don't get jet lag. Japan tends to be pretty green in spring, autumn and summer. It goes quite brown in the winter. I don't think it's so expensive to live here. Certain things are expensive, I find, like electronic products and tools and so on. But eating out is pretty cheap, and food at the supermarket is also pretty cheap too. What is hotter? Well, the Melbourne summer can have really hot days into the mid-40s and so on. And that's hotter than Japan, but Japan is a lot more humid in summer. So in many ways, it's more uncomfortable. So my background, my father was originally English and my mother Indonesian, but I was born and raised in Melbourne. I had a pretty typical childhood, nothing particularly special there. And I went to university and worked for a few years in Australia, well in Canberra. And then I left kind of really to go traveling. And I met my wife when I was here the first time in Japan, when I was on my working holiday. And we got married and moved together to London. I haven't lived in Australia for almost 20 years. And even before that, I was traveling quite a lot and spent quite a bit of time abroad. So before I came to Japan, I was actually living in the UK, in London. We lived there for about 10 years. And before that, I was in South America for about 1 year, and then Japan for 2 years, as I mentioned before. And then even then, I wasn't living in Melbourne, I was living in Canberra. So I haven't lived in Melbourne for such a long time. It's hard for me to say, but whenever I go back, I look forward to going to a cafe, having a nice breakfast and a nice coffee. I also miss playing footy, but you know, I'm probably at an age now where I'm too old to play. The reason to start the YouTube channel is that I thought it would be a pretty interesting process and I wanted to record it. And then, well, I thought it would be something that would be worth sharing with other people. If no one else watched it, that would be fine. It would be there for posterity's sake, something we could look back on as a family in years to come. And just now that there seem to be quite a lot of subscribers and viewers, which I'm really happy about, has actually been a real bonus. The other reason was I'd always been interested in filmmaking, something like that. So I thought it would be a good way of just learning a new skill. Also, having a goal, so like putting on YouTube, was something that helped keep me disciplined in filming. I think I don't know, maybe if I hadn't had the YouTube channel, I would have stopped filming, got bored of it, or you know, been too busy to record and so on. So it's helped keep me disciplined as well. Yeah, and another thing is, and it wasn't my original objective at the beginning when I started looking at abandoned houses and Akia and so on, looking for one to buy and renovate. But I think it's becoming an important issue in Japan, especially as the population starts to thin out even further. So hopefully the channel provides some useful information and also helps promote this kind of use of property, and you know, maybe encourage a few more people to do something similar. Question about what I use Final Cut Pro. I started off with iMovie, but as the videos got a bit more complicated and longer, just found iMovie was quite limiting. I then bought the Bullet and got Final Cut Pro, and I have really found that to be really good for what I want to do. Yeah, so I basically have been learning as I've been going along. Again, just using YouTube as a resource to learn how to do editing, and you know, watching other YouTubers, did I say other YouTubers? did I just kind of refer to myself as a YouTuber? I mean, watching other YouTube channels and so on to learn how to do things. So I got heaps of questions about my future with YouTube and what I'll do after the house is complete. So firstly, I don't think this house will ever be complete. So as I've already mentioned, there's a deck coming up. I've got the Japanese garden. I've got a chicken coop. The rest of the garden and still needs quite a bit of work. And then also I've got that 2-story kura, the shed, that needs lots and lots of work, and that's almost a project. Well, it is a project all in itself. So other people have asked what I'm planning to do with that. I know in one of my first videos I mentioned that I'd consider using it as a guest house, but that option is pretty much off the table now. I decided I won't do that. The bottom floors, one I'm going to use just as a kind of tool shed. The other one I want to convert into a workshop. I still haven't decided exactly what to do with the second floor. It's a bit inconvenient to use as a workshop, particularly with those stairs there. I may put another staircase to access it directly from the outside, but it could be an office. I don't know exactly. I'm still thinking. But I'm not going to do a guest house or an Airbnb. And further to that Airbnb question, whether we would rent this house, the main house, out in Airbnb, I had toyed with the idea. So I thought maybe, you know, if we go on holiday, we go to Australia for a couple of weeks or something like that, we could rent the house out while we're away. But I'm not sure it's worth it. Yeah, just with security and privacy and so on. It's related to why I'm not so keen to have visitors coming here. I mean, I'm sure most people are fine and it would be perfectly okay to have people come and visit, viewers and subscribers from YouTube. But yeah, it's just, I think just it's not really a good idea. It's a bit risky, as much as I'd love to show you guys around. I think mainly from privacy and security point of view, I probably won't. So getting back to the question about what I'll do with this channel after the main house renovations are finished. So apart from those ongoing projects, what I'd like to do is go out and visit other people who have renovated abandoned houses or kominka style houses like this one, whether that be foreigners or Japanese. So things like that. Yeah, and maybe some rural Japanese life, something still not too far from this main topic here. Where did the name Tokyo Llama come from? So good question. All right, so when I came to Japan 2 and a bit years ago, my mother-in-law was running a cafe and she was thinking about retiring. So I thought maybe it would be interesting to try and resuscitate the business a bit or just change it and try something else there. So my plan was to perhaps blog or something about that process of running a cafe or setting up a cafe in Japan. So I learnt to bake and so on, and I was going to try and bring a few ideas from, say, a Melbourne cafe. I thought it might be interesting. And then I was thinking, well, what's a good name for a blog? And I don't know, I wanted to include some kind of animal in it. I don't know why, but I thought it would be easier to have a logo with some animal. And I was trying to think of a logo and an animal. And since I spent a bit of time in South America, I don't know, I sort of developed an interest in llamas, alpacas and vicuñas, and llama seemed to be the one that rolled off the tongue most easily. And then it came to the location. So I live in Ibaraki, and not many people outside of Japan really know Ibaraki. And it's a bit of a mouthful sometimes, especially Ibaraki Llama. Well, it didn't sound that good, and I figured it was close enough to Tokyo that I'll just use Tokyo and it'd be more familiar. So that's what happened. In the end, though, I decided that the cafe was a bit of an uphill battle, considering we're in a location that is not convenient for anyone, and most of the customers are going to be elderly people who were interested in my cakes at the beginning, but the novelty wore off for everyone, including myself. And then my mother-in-law decided to close the cafe. She decided to retire earlier this year. So yeah, and it just happened that since I had all of that set up for that blog, Itokyo Llama, when I started the YouTube channel, I thought, wow, just since I've paid for a URL and I got a logo done on Fiverr, I just keep it and continue with that. So that's how I ended up with this. And now I've kind of, especially early on, I did toy with changing it, but it's kind of stuck now. So yeah, it's fine. Thanks very much for watching. I hope that answered most of your questions. If I didn't make it to your particular question, I'll try and answer it directly in the comments. Okay, so my next video hopefully will be a renovation video. Like I said in the first part, just waiting to finish certain elements. So like when I finish that, well, when I should say, when the carpenter finishes that bathroom, I'll show a bit more of that process. A los hablantes de español, muchas gracias por mirar mis videos. Espero que puedan entender los subtítulos que pongo. Sé que no son perfectos, pero bueno, es mejor que nada, ¿no? Y aprendí mi español en Ecuador. Estuve en Ecuador casi un año, hace más o menos 15 años. Y luego cuando vivía en Londres conseguí trabajo en una empresa española. Pero desde entonces no he tenido muchas oportunidades para hablar español y por lo tanto he olvidado bastante. Pero estoy tratando de contestar sus preguntas en los comentarios. Y bueno, eso es todo. Muchas gracias otra vez y saludos desde Japón.